Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're checking out another 4K high-refresh gaming monitor, this time from MSI. The competition in the 27-inch 4K gaming space has been super hot of late. We've looked at many great products in the last year or so, including the Gigabyte M28U, Eve Spectrum 4K, and LG 27GP950, and today we'll be giving a verdict on whether the MSI Optix MAG281URF is worth your hard-earned cash. Here's the basic specs for the MAG281URF. It packs a 28-inch 3840 by 2160 display with a maximum refresh rate of 144Hz. It uses an IPS panel, almost certainly the same Innolux panel we've seen used in many other monitors. MSI advertises a 1 millisecond greater grey response time, HDMI 2.1 support, and Display HDR 400 certification, all of which we'll have to explore throughout this review. All of this is available at an MSRP of $700 US or $1,100 for us here in Australia, which is at the cheaper end of the scale for this type of monitor.
Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Gigabyte and their brand new range of Intel B660 motherboards. A particular favourite of ours is the B660M Aorus Pro AX, as this micro ATX board really does pack it all. A powerful VRM comprised of a dozen 60amp power stages, complete with impressive looking and very effective aluminium heatsinks. There's loads of USB ports on the I/O panel, Wi-Fi 6, Intel 2.5 gigabit LAN, and plenty of onboard expansion options. Also, Gigabyte has a competition running right now to win a free Aorus upgrade, so please do check the link in the video description.
What's interesting about the MAG281URF is that this is actually the fourth monitor I'm testing that uses the exact same Innolux panel, the others being the Gigabyte M28U, Asus TUF Gaming VG28UQL1A, and Samsung Odyssey G7 LS28AG700. So whether the MSI model comes out on top is going to come down to performance optimization, features, and of course the price. Just because several monitors all use the same hardware panel doesn't mean they all perform the same, as we've seen many times in the past. MSI's version of this monitor uses their standard optics design, which is more on the gamer end of the scale when it comes to aesthetics. From the front, everything looks fairly standard, and what you're getting for the most part is typical black plastic, including on the stand. There is a little bit of a chin going on below the display, but I've also seen MSI do far worse when it comes to that bottom bezel, so yeah, it's not too bad here. When we flick around to look at the back though, MSI is definitely letting you know this monitor is designed for gamers. There's a bunch of angles here and different finishes for the plastic, including a glossy section. There's a PCB track pattern going on here, and also RGB LED lighting. Unfortunately, the lighting is a bit useless as it's too dim to be used as an ambient light effect, so it ends up really only being visible if you're looking directly at the back of the display, which you probably won't be doing most of the time. MSI offers good ergonomics with the included stand, as it features all of height, tilt, swivel, and pivot adjustment, plus of course there's phaser mounting support if you need it. Then for ports, we get one DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC, one USB-C port that supports DP alt mode, and two HDMI 2.1 ports. The HDMI ports are full 48 gigabits per second ports and have no issues running at 144Hz on PC or 120Hz on console. As for the OSD and features, MSI have been stepping up their game here to match some of the other vendors. There's a KVM switch here, which is becoming an increasingly popular inclusion for high-end gaming displays, plus all the usual gaming stuff like shadow boosting and crosshairs for cheating. MSI's interface is controllable through a directional toggle, and it's really easy to navigate. For response time performance, it's all surprisingly straightforward with the MAG281URF. There are three included overdrive settings, so we'll start with the normal mode at 144Hz, which provides decent results. We're getting a 4.7 millisecond average response time and only a small amount of overshoot, which leads to very solid cumulative deviation results. This amount of inverse ghosting isn't noticeable in practice, so you'll have no issues gaming using this mode. It's generally quite clear and responsive as far as 144Hz displays go. Moving up to the fast mode, and here the balance has changed somewhat. The average response time has improved to 4.07 milliseconds, but this has come at the expense of overshoot. We're now seeing inverse ghosting around 1/3 of the time. The cumulative deviation score hasn't changed much, which suggests the overall balance is quite similar to the normal mode. It's just the normal mode is more of a lower overshoot setting, while the fast mode is more of a lower response time setting. I find the increase to overshoot more noticeable than the improvement to response times, so my preference is to use the normal mode. Unsurprisingly, the fastest mode is pretty unusable due to the level of inverse ghosting. This mode isn't the craziest I've ever seen, but there is a pronounced trail following moving objects here, which you get when the inverse ghosting rate is so high. I wouldn't consider using this mode. As for gaming across the entire refresh rate range, there is one obvious choice, and that's to use the normal mode. Performance holds up relatively well at higher refresh rates, and certainly even around the 100Hz mark, you'll find it hard to spot inverse ghosting with this amount and magnitude of overshoot. At 85 and 60Hz, I started to spot faint trails at times due to the overshoot, but it's not too bad. It could be better for sure. My preference would be lower overshoot. However, I don't think it's going to ruin your gaming experience. My assessment is that the MAG281URF does have a single overdrive mode experience, as the normal mode provides good performance across the entire refresh rate range. I would have liked an option below normal just for people that really can't tolerate even the slightest amount of overshoot at 60Hz, but unfortunately normal is as low as it goes. Alternatively, variable overdrive would have been a good choice, but the normal mode is still decent enough for gaming. When compared to other displays at the maximum refresh rate using optimal overdrive settings, there really isn't anything separating the MAG281URF from other similar 4K 144Hz gaming monitors. Performance is essentially identical to the M28U, VG28UQL1A, and Odyssey G7S28, indicating that all use very similar optimization. LG-based monitors are also very competitive, such as the 27GP850. They are slightly slower, but to a degree which isn't noticeable in practice. It's really only when comparing to other formats or older displays that we start to see a difference. As for average performance across the entire refresh rate range, again, there is simply nothing splitting the four Innolux-based models we've tested. The M28U, VG28UQL1A, and MAG281URF in particular are all so close that they could be the same display, and that's because they are in terms of motion performance. Generally, these four have a small performance edge on products like the 27GP950 and EVE Spectrum 4K, though you do get improved overshoot behavior with an LG-based display. If it wasn't obvious that a lot of these monitors perform the same in previous charts, it should be very clear when looking at cumulative deviation. The MAG281URF and M28U deliver the exact same performance here, not just similar performance, the exact same number. In fact, I only recorded a 3% difference between the best and worst monitor using this Innolux panel. That's a very small difference. With most of the current 4K 144Hz gaming monitors on the market, you're splitting hairs over which is better in motion. For console gamers planning to use this display at 4K 120Hz, there really is no appreciable difference between any of the 4K monitors we've been discussing. So long as it has proper HDMI 2.1 support, which most of them do, you'll be set. Then for 60Hz gaming, all four Innolux panel monitors do have rather high overshoot, higher than I'd normally like to see. This could be one benefit to getting a monitor like the LG 27GP950 or EVE Spectrum 4K. You can turn down the overdrive a bit on those monitors to reduce overshoot artifacts if you're primarily gaming around the 60Hz mark. No issues with input lag. The MAG281URF hits our 1 millisecond processing delay threshold, which again is pretty similar to most other monitors in this class. If you're really serious about low latency competitive gaming, I'd probably recommend you get a 1440p 240Hz monitor instead, which are usually available around the same price as 4K 144Hz. The higher refresh rate does reduce input latency and improves responsiveness and motion clarity. Power consumption is also very similar between most 4K 144Hz monitors that I've tested, so really it's not a significant factor, especially as we're talking about below 40 watts for all of them, unless you go with something larger than 28 inches in size. Backlight strobing time, MSI does support it through MPRT sync, which allows you to use backlight strobing and adaptive sync simultaneously. While this is a nice inclusion that makes the feature much more usable, it's still lacking in other features. For example, when MPRT sync is enabled, you cannot adjust the brightness, which is locked at around 140 nits, and there are no strobe controls. It also doesn't work at 60 Hz. As for quality, I was pleased to see the sync part is effective, so it is usable when gaming at a variable refresh rate. The quality is good, especially in the center of the display where crosstalk and double images are minimal, although performance was a lot worse at the top of the display. However, the use of a KSF backlight means there is a slow red phosphor, which causes red fringing when backlight strobing is enabled, quite an annoying artifact that does hurt visual quality. Compared to other displays, the backlight strobing implementation is very similar to the Gigabyte M28U, better than the Samsung S28, but not quite as good as the Asus VG28UQL1A, although all have similar red fringing issues, because of course they use the same panel. For color performance, the MAG281URF offers 94% coverage of the DCI-P3 color space, which is a decent result. However, it only has suitable coverage of P3 and sRGB. You're not getting meaningful Adobe RGB coverage here, as the gamut doesn't extend far enough into the greens. We end up with just 69%, nice, Rec 2020 coverage, which is similar to other monitors using the same panel, but low down in the chart and below what you'd get from an LG Nano IPS monitor like the 27GP950. Factory calibration with my unit was below average, especially for color temperature, where there was a noticeable red tint out of the box. Gamma performance was also mediocre, which led to rather high delta E's for grayscale, not exactly ideal for a default configuration. MSI also does not use a gamut clamp by default, so regular sRGB images that you'll be viewing a lot of the time are oversaturated, think YouTube videos or web pages. It's not significant oversaturation, and of course some people like this effect, but it's also not accurate. Unlike with motion performance, we do see some separation between 4K displays in factory calibration. The MAG281URF does not fare well for grayscale calibration and is significantly worse than the leader here, the Gigabyte M28U, although not too different to the Asus and Samsung models. It's similar in color checker, the MSI model is not that impressive compared to other options. Luckily, there is an included sRGB mode, which gives you the illusion that some settings like white balance are still adjustable within the sRGB mode. However, as soon as you change them, the sRGB mode deactivates, which is disappointing. Nevertheless, this mode does perform better, including in grayscale, where the CCT curve is more accurate, though gamma is still a bit wonky. Delta E performance is still short of what I describe as accurate though. The good news is that the sRGB gamut clamp is effective at reducing saturation and improving delta E's, so I'd recommend using this instead of the default mode for viewing SDR content. However, the sRGB mode is still below average compared to other modes I've tested, and in particular, the Gigabyte M28U includes an excellent sRGB mode that's much better calibrated, so if you care about factory colors, the Gigabyte model is the way to go. While there are some differences in out-of-the-box performance, basically all of today's 4K gaming monitors can be fully calibrated to an excellent level for both sRGB and P3 content. I used Portrait Display's CalMan software and achieved great results. The only lingering issue is the very top of the P3 gamut, which can't be covered by this monitor. The rest of the performance is very solid. Patreon and Floatplane members can download the ICC profiles we created. The MAG281URF is not a very bright display, only hitting 270 in its peak in my testing after calibration. This isn't too different from other Innolux-based monitors. The Samsung variant is only 15% brighter and will still be suitable for most indoor usage, but in more difficult or bright conditions, I don't think this display will be bright enough, especially compared to something like the Eve Spectrum. Minimum brightness is also not that amazing. I would have expected a greater range of usable brightness given the low peak brightness you get. Then for contrast ratio, we're looking at a very standard IPS panel with a contrast ratio around 1000 to 1. There does appear to be a bit of variance with this panel, but generally around or just over 1000 to 1 appears to be normal. That's fine, but not amazing in comparison to VA panels, which absolutely destroy IPS monitors in black levels and contrast. If you want improved shadow detail and a better gaming experience in dark rooms, VA is the way to go, although unfortunately there are no suitable 4K VA monitors of this size on the market right now. Viewing angles are decent, no issues there, and then for uniformity we're also looking at a pretty typical experience. The delta E's we're showing here aren't very noticeable in practice, and while it's not perfectly even, this is fine for a gaming monitor. Just a quick note on HDR performance here as well. MSI do advertise display HDR 400 certification, but it should be pretty obvious that this monitor is not HDR capable as it lacks proper HDR hardware. Specifically, there is no local dimming functionality, so the contrast ratio is capped to a terrible and insufficient level for HDR. The display also doesn't get bright enough. Oddly, it can do up to 470 nits in the HDR mode. Why isn't this available for SDR use? Doesn't make a lot of sense. But anyway, it falls short of our 600 nit threshold. The last section of this review is the Hub Essentials checklist, which assesses whether MSI is accurately advertising this monitor's capabilities and whether the display meets basic acceptable performance metrics. MSI does well in the design section, including accurately advertising HDMI 2.1 capabilities. There were also only a few red marks in the color section. I had to penalize them here for advertising 300 nits of brightness for the SDR mode. The actual result was nearly 10% under that amount, and of course we had a few sRGB mode limitations. For motion performance, MSI do advertise a 1 millisecond gray to gray transition time, but this isn't achievable in the usable overdrive settings. You can push some transitions to near 1 millisecond if you use the fastest mode, which has stupid levels of overshoot. But in modes buyers would actually use, the monitor is more like 4 to 5 milliseconds gray to gray. So MSI here are misleading customers by saying it's a 1 millisecond monitor. MSI also misled buyers by suggesting this is an HDR capable display, when really it is not HDR capable at all. However, in a positive note, the display sails through the issues and defects section with 0 red flags. Overall, there certainly haven't been many surprises when it comes to the MSI Optix MAG281URF. MSI have used the same Innolux panel as several other 28-inch 4K 144Hz monitors we've already tested, and as expected, it performs very similarly to those displays. This is especially true in motion performance, where the MAG281URF is practically identical to other options you might be considering. For the most part, that's good news, because I've previously been very impressed with the latest 4K displays using this Innolux panel. Motion performance is fast, color quality is generally pretty decent, you're getting HDMI 2.1 and backlight strobing, and the panel is of good quality with no obvious defects. The MAG281URF only failed 11 of 36 checklist items, which is a better than average result, and only let down significantly by advertising HDR when it's really not an HDR monitor. If you do end up getting this display, I think you'll be quite pleased with how good it is for 4K gaming. However, not everything about this monitor is amazing, and I do have some concerns with some areas to color performance. The MAG281URF doesn't get very bright in the SDR mode, and its factory calibration is weak, especially compared to the excellent Gigabyte M28U. It can produce very accurate results and has naturally great viewing angles, but it needs a bit of work to get it there, while the M28U does not. It's these small factors that separate two displays that are otherwise very similar. The M28U, on the other hand, has its own set of minor issues, like only having 24 gigabits per second HDMI 2.1 ports, which can be an issue when hooking up to a PS5. The MAG281URF does give you full 48 gigabits per second ports, the way it should be. Ultimately though, when choosing between all of the available 28-inch 4K 144Hz gaming monitors, I'd personally tend to choose the cheapest one, because at the end of the day they all deliver pretty similar performance. Unless there's a specific feature that you need, all 4 of the options I've tested so far are great gaming monitors, so getting the cheapest one in your region makes sense. In terms of value, MSI are putting themselves in a good position by pricing the MAG281URF at $700 US. Both the Asus and Samsung variants are currently $800, which right now puts them out of the running. However, the Gigabyte M28U is a $650 monitor, and it's also slightly better in performance. So right now I'd be choosing the M28U over the MAG281URF, but that could change in the future or in other regions if the MSI model is the most affordable. For buyers less concerned about value and more concerned with getting the best of the best, I'd definitely be looking at the LG 27GP950 and especially the EVE Spectrum 4K. You'll have to spend more like $900 on the Spectrum, but it has a stronger feature set and elite factory calibration, which makes it worth considering. However, value-oriented shoppers should stick with the M28U in general, as jumping up from $650 to $900 is quite a leap. Anyway, that's it for this review of MSI's latest 4K 144Hz gaming monitor. If you do appreciate our independent testing, I'd highly recommend that you sign up to our Patreon and Floatplane accounts, where you'll be supporting our testing, allowing us to buy certain monitors, and also gaining access to things like our ICC profiles, our Discord community, monthly live streams, and all sorts of good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.